Alright, welcome guys to another deck review. Today we are going to take a closer look at the black blocker deck, or the black wall deck as I like to call it. And we're going to go through step by step what each Digimon does, how it works, how they combo, and most importantly what they counter and what their matchups are. Alright, so starting off with our eggs here. First of all, we have Craniamon, which basically buffs our blockers up. We will need these buffs later on during the game. So they have enough stats to keep up with other big threats on the board. And we want to get it as high as possible, the DP, so they can basically contest anything that your opponent plays. Now, Pagumon is basically a draw engine. It helps you keep refilling your hand if your blocker dies, which shouldn't happen too often, but if it does, it's nice to have that extra draw. Alright, starting off with our rookies here. On the level 3 side we got Toy Agumon, first of all. The nice thing about Toy Agumon is that the reboot part of it, the inheritance effect. So you want to build up to a big blocker in the mid to late game, which can also attack without you getting punished for it. So basically you have a big blocker which you don't want to attack really because you want it to block enemy threats. However, with this in its Digivolution, you can reset that, so you can still have that wall going on that you built up. Now the next Toy Agumon here that we have, it gives another attack boost, like another DP boost to your Digimon, your final one. Because keep in mind, like the final ones that you will have, they will be fairly low in attack, so you want to have that as high as possible. So you can definitely keep, enemy Digimon away from your security and have that Digimon also survive that battle. Now, Sunarisamon here is a really nice option once you've already built that wall, because it gives your black Digimon with 13,000 DP or more, they gain piercing, which is really nice in case your opponent also plays some big blockers, so you can easily get through them. And you'll notice that you will have, with these attack buffs, with these DP buffs that we have here in the early game, and also with the egg that I showed you before, it's pretty easy to get your Digimon up to 13,000 DP or more. Also, if you choose to use it as a Digivolution card, it also has the inheritance effect. Instead of piercing, it just gives your Digimon +1 security attack, which is also really nice to get through that late game push, that finishing part of the game. And as a last rookie, we have Craniamon, which is basically just a counter to, for example, Jesmon, which if it shows up in your security, it can just deal with that outright by itself. Alright, next up on the list we have Greymon. Now this is another one of these Digimon that helps you buff up your late game threats. And the important part about this one is the inheritance, obviously, because it doesn't have much else going on. Now it says if your Digimon has reboot, it gains jamming as well. So it essentially helps you keep that presence on the board in the late game. So once you give it reboot with the Toy Agumon that we talked about earlier, you can basically attack without any worries about it dying to their security, about some option card, some high DP Digimon that's waiting for you there. So that's a really nice option to keep it alive. However, we only put four of Greymon in the deck because it is kind of expensive. I mean, you are paying 2 memory for the Digivolution, which is kind of expensive for that. However, we got other more cheaper options, like for example Dark Tyrannomon, which is basically just a cheap blocker that you can keep on the board and that will keep your security protected. Its cost of 1 for the Digivolution is really low, and you can get it on the board so easily that it's just for the cost, the value that you get from it is too good to pass on. So we put 4 of that into the deck. Now, it can't attack. However, you're going to keep this on the board mostly as just, you know, a cheap blocker, a cheap like threat, a deterrent from your opponent attacking, which is really nice to keep. And if you need to capitalize off of it in the late game, you can also put a Digivolution card on it, and it will become a much more offensive threat again. Now, the next one, Craniamon, is a really key card in this deck, and we only put 2 of them in there, but it's important to keep in mind that this card alone can shut down rush decks, which build a wide and really low DP board by themselves. They can basically not get through this, because the effect says if this Digimon blocks an opponent's Digimon in battle and survives, you can unsuspend it, so basically it can block again. So if your opponent has a lot of small tokens that want to attack all at once, you can have this on the board and it will shut their attack down immediately. Shademon is a really nice blocker, which helps you also stay alive through the mid to early game. It's not the cheapest option, as you can see. However, for the cost of 2, it's still a really solid body that you get on the field. With 5000 DP, it can block pretty much any early rush type of deck, and it can't attack though. But I mean, that's not the point of the deck anyway. You want to build up to the late game. So this helps you stabilize on the board, so your opponent can't just outright win with their early game. Alright guys, coming up to our level 5s here, our ultimate Digimon. First up we got Gogumon, which has the effect that you can Digiburst one of its Digivolution cards to gain the effect that you have 2000 DP more until the end of your opponent's next turn. Now, you see that it doesn't have blocker, but that's not a problem, because you need to keep in mind that once you activate this effect, it keeps that effect even if you Digivolve it another time. So if you put a blocker on this one, it will keep that effect until your opponent's the end of your opponent's next turn. Once you Digivolve on it, it gains another 1000 DP for all turns, which is really important. So it keeps getting bigger and bigger, which really helps to build up that, you know, enormous wall that you'll have in the late game. Next up we got Metal Greymon, which is really nice because it gives you a reboot. So if you want to chip that extra damage in, you know, once you Digivolve on it, you can do that without any real risk. Obviously you don't want it to die. However, if you have jamming through one of these inheritance effects, you can pretty much do that without any worries. Furthermore, if you continue Digivolve on this Digimon, if it has reboot, it gains security attack +1, which really makes this a big threat in the late game. And you'll see on our level 6 Digimon why this is so important, because you really need that extra boost to finish your opponent off. Now, for our last level 5 Digimon, we have Megadramon, and the important aspect of this card is the inheritance effect. Now, it gives blocker, which doesn't sound like too much because you already have big blockers, but once I show you the level 7 Digimon, which you'll actually have in this deck, it will start to make a lot more sense. Alright, coming up on our level 6 Digimon here, our mega finishing turns. First up we have Craniamon. This is one of the core cards that you will have to find in your deck once you're playing. This card alone will keep all of your blockers safe from any option cards or any card effects in general that they'll use. The effect says that, the important effect for that matter, is that any of your Digimon with blocker cannot be deleted by opponent's card effects, which is really important once they get access to their mass removal, you know, their Trump Swords, their Gaia Forces, you name it. They can't remove any of your blockers, which is really nice. And you also have the nice benefit that once you gave your Digimon blocker through inheritance effects, these also count. So your opponent basically can't remove your entire board once you set it up. This is your sealing card in that sense. It will seal off the game for you. Next up we have Gankumon. This Digimon is really nice and acts like a removal type of card. It will delete all of your opponent's Digimon with the lowest play cost. So if your opponent is spamming the board with you know, smaller Digimon, you can have all of those removed at once. But keep in mind that also if your opponent is just playing one big Digimon on their field, if they just have one, you can also play this as a removal for this one. So it acts like hard removal and a mass removal at the same time, which is why we put it in the deck. It also gains security +1, which is nice if you want to get that extra damage in, if you want to finish off your opponent. And in general, it will have blocker and reboot and all that good stuff as well, because you gave it that with your inheritance effects. So it's also really difficult to remove in combination with Craniamon. Your Wargreymon is also a really nice tool to finish off your opponent, because it has reboot. So even if you attack your opponent and you didn't manage to give it reboot with your lower level Digimon, it will basically just reboot itself. And it also has blocker, so Craniamon protects it. So that's kind of your end game scenario, where you have multiple of these 6-drops in play which can't be removed easily. So they have to attack into it, and they have to kill them off like this to enable to attack you directly in the first place. So once you have these set, you're basically good to go. Alright, going up to our level 7 Digimon, actually our only one in this deck, which is Omnimon Ward. Now this is a very niche type of card that you will need in this deck. Now if you have Craniamon in play, for example, you obviously don't want to Digivolve it into Omnimon Ward, because the effect of Craniamon is just so important to your play style. However, if you have, for example, Wargreymon or you know, Gankumon, you can Digivolve it into this and it will basically refill your board. What it says is you can remove the top 3 cards of your deck, and then from your deck play 2 Digimon with the play cost of 8 or less. Now the play cost of this, which is very important, they don't need to be added up to 8. They individually need to cost less than 8. So you can have 2 Digimon that cost 8 or less put onto the board like that. Now obviously you want to put some more blockers onto the field, so you have a wide range of blocker minions on the board, which will help you stabilize and, you know, help you with a lot of threats from the opponent. And the nice part about Omnimon Ward is once you attack, you can actually use the level 6 Digimon that you have behind it to delete one of your opponent's Digimon with a play cost of 12 or less, which is basically most of them. And since your level 6 Digimon don't really have an inheritance effect in this deck anyway, it's basically for free. So the next attack that you get, you can also delete one of your opponent's Digimon with a play cost of 12 or less, of course. And you need to keep in mind also that once you do Digivolve Omnimon Ward onto your high level Digimon, that this might not have blocker. You need to be careful that you still have blocker in the inheritance, or else you lose an important part of your board. Since this is a huge body, it needs to have some sort of attribute to, you know, to make it worth the board space that you have. So the memory that you pay for it needs to pay off in the end. Alright, coming up next with the tamers. First of all, we got Tai. He's obviously a pretty basic tamer, but nonetheless he's very important to the deck. It helps with the memory cost, so you'll always get to 3 once you have it in play. And the other important part is that your black Digimon, your blockers essentially, they get an extra 1000 DP in your opponent's turn. So it really helps you with that buffing up of your board that you want to have in the late game. Now the other tamer that you have is Izzy and Joe, and at the start of your turn, if your opponent has 2 or more Digimon in play, which is basically what you hope for, like, because that's what you counter essentially, you'll get an extra 2 memory, which really helps you with setting up your board, getting up those huge threats for your opponent. And overall, it's a really nice card. It's a really nice tamer if you have the requirement. Now, if your blocker or one of your Digimon gets deleted, you can tap this tamer actually to draw a card. It's nice to have, but generally this won't happen too often. Like, you'll mostly want this tamer for the memory effect. However, if it happens, it's also really nice to have it as kind of a draw engine for your deck. Alright, coming up with the last part of our review is the option cards. You'll have 3 of those. First of all, you have the final Zubagon Punch. It costs 2 memory. It gives one of your Digimon 3000 DP until the end of your opponent's next turn, and you'll get all sorts of effects with that if your Digimon reaches this 16,000 DP threshold. So that's why we buffed up our Digimon earlier, so you can more easily reach that goal. Once you have those big Digimon in play and you give them this buff, you'll gain blocker, reboot, and security attack +1, which is really nice if you have an already buffed up high level Digimon in play. Oftentimes you can attack for security +2 and then not even having to worry about it getting deleted, because it just has reboot, so you can even block an incoming attack from your opponent's next turn. This is a finishing option, so if you already have that board in play, you can use this to kind of seal the game off for you. Next card that we have, the next option that we have is Ultimate Flare. Now, Ultimate Flare is a really expensive option card. You need to keep that in mind. This is a last resort option. If you have to remove one of your opponent's Digimon, you can play this, and it's generally worth it. The effect that it does is it de-digivolves one of your opponent's Digimon by 3. And the reason why that's important is because it doesn't destroy it, it de-digivolves it. So for example, if you have a mirror matchup and the opponent has, say, Craniamon in play, you can actually use that on Craniamon. Since you're not deleting it, you're only digivolving it, which takes care of his huge board presence. After that, you delete all of his level 3, his level 3 Digimon. Nej, för nästa Repost. After that, it deletes all of your opponent's Digimon with play cost of 3 or less, which, if your opponent has a wide board with low level Digimon in play, you can take care of the whole board with that. This is not going to happen too often. However, if it does, it's going to be a huge swing of the board. the important part about this card and why it's so good in the end as well is because if it's in your security, you can activate the main effect. You're not just getting it on your hand, you're actually activating it. And this can turn around whole games in which you are behind. For example, if you're playing against a Rookie Rush deck and this shows up in your security, you basically delete their entire board, and then you can start building up that wall and they'll not get through again. So once that happens, you basically just won the game. Now, Black Memory Boost, this is a really versatile card. It helps you cycle through your deck a bit. It helps you with memory in case you have extra memory in those early turns. If you, for example, don't have a clean curve from your Digivolutions, you can just play a Black Memory Boost and save up that memory. It also gives you that nice extra draw. If it's in your security, that's also really nice because it essentially gives you 2 extra memory on your next turn or the turn that you need it. Alright, so one of the combos that we wanted to talk about in this video is if you have a setup like this, for example, in your board, you are pretty much set for the game because it essentially allows you to get rid of any threat that your opponent might have. Now, obviously your board is going to look a bit different, maybe like you're going to have Digivolution cards under Craniamon and all of that, but the important part is that these cards, as is, are on the board because they essentially protect each other. So what you have here is you have Tai giving you that 1000 DP boost on both of your blockers. You have Toy Agumon under your Mechanorimon, which gives it another 1000 DP boost. And what this essentially means is that your Mechanorimon cannot be removed by any option cards your opponent has because it's protected by Craniamon. But at the same time, you can always block any small attack that your opponent wants to do. This, as it sits, has 8000 DP. It might have more in your case, but in most cases it will have like around that 8000 threshold, which your opponent has to overcome. This can always reset itself. So your opponent cannot get through this without any without multiple big threats that he basically has to commit to get through this. If your opponent only has, say, one big Digimon on their board which he wants to attack with, you can generally just block with Craniamon by itself. And since it will have more than 14,000 DP on average, of course, you can block that level 6 attack with Craniamon itself, and everything else that he has you block with Mechanorimon. And while this all happens, your security is safe. It will never get through this unless they manage to have big enough threats to get through both of them, which is rarely going to happen, but it can happen. This is where the strength of the deck is. Once you have your board set up in a way that your opponent has difficulties getting through, they are locked out of the game. Like, they cannot reach your security anymore. And that's when you know that you basically won the game. Alright, this has been our deck review from the Black Blocker deck. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Leave a like and subscribe to the channel. We will always keep you posted with new and interesting deck profiles and matches, so you definitely want to stay tuned. See you next time, guys.